One. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to now do a tight and powerful summary of exactly what humanity needs to know and do in order to survive. First, context. We're in a period of exponential planetary overheating with no end in sight until we get up in the 10 degree centigrade range. It's that serious, it's that deadly. And the only way to both stop that and then reverse it, there's only one way to do it, and it's called SRM, solar radiation management. And what we've reached consensus on is that we need to focus the world on two solutions in parallel, which are self-reinforcing. One is planetary scale SRM to cool the planet in time, something we need to implement in the next 12 months-ish, maybe even less. The second is feeding everyone, right? Nutritious, immune-boosting plant-based foods so that we take care of humanity and, quite frankly, stabilize civilization so that we don't go Mad Max while we're deploying millions of square miles of planetary scale SRM, okay? So those are the two things: feed everyone and cool the planet, and we need to do those in parallel. Now, this one of the things that's holding us back, and the main reason that you haven't heard about SRM probably before, right, if you're the average person watching this video, is because the SRM community itself is not united. It's fragmented. There's on the order of a dozen different ways of doing SRM to cool the planet, and the proponents of any one particular way tend to not even communicate with the proponents of a different way. And so what ends up, it's a cluster mess, and what we need is a united front focused on SRM as a whole, including all dozen ways, so that imagine that the planetary SRM community can then, as a united front, present a single message to the rest of humanity, which is this: we need SRM, and we need it at massive planetary scales, and we need it now. Now, exactly how are we going to do it? There's a dozen different ways. We're working on figuring out the optimal mix, and more news on that at 11. But pay attention to the headline: planetary scale SRM needed right now, urgently. And then combine that with feeding everyone, and there you have a singular message, a singular solution: food and cool. Feed everyone and cool the planet, and that's the beginning of the new story for humanity. That's it in a nutshell. So we need to put together the leadership team which can reach out to all the folks working on SRM in the world, not too many people, so it's not a huge task. Bring them all together, invite them all to a meeting or a series of meetings centered around the intention of building a united front to cool the planet through SRM, okay? And then in parallel, do similar leadership work around feeding everyone and building a planetary community centered around that. And then, the Holy Grail is bringing those two together into a singular story. And so we need the right leadership to tell that singular story. This is a start. This meeting here is a start. And with that, I'm going to go on mute and see if there's anything else anyone would like to add to that. Yeah, please.
I would love you to add, if you would, something about the critical timing, please.
Yeah. So the critical timing is it's unknown, right? It's like I've got a beautiful house of cards of 5 different layers, and I start dropping grapes on top. How many grapes do I have to drop until the whole thing collapses? Totally unpredictable. That's kind of where we're at right now. With the combination of all the greenhouse gases we've dumped into the atmosphere, the 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops, all driving towards a steep exponential in planetary overheating, including the melting of ice, forest fires, etc. Now combine that with the COVID-driven reduction in emission of particulates, which in and of itself are an unintended form of SRM that's actually keeping us artificially cool. Now, with the decrease in emissions, it's ashes, it all falls down, and we suddenly have less particulates, less micro mirrors up in the sky. keeping us cool. So now it was predicted before COVID-19 that if we had even a 20% reduction in industrial activity, we could see a 1 degree centigrade spike in temperature within weeks. Well, with COVID, we've got on that order of magnitude of reduction, could even have more of a reduction. So we're skating on ice that's so thin, it's actually a bit of a wonder that we haven't punched through yet. So we don't know how much time we have left, but it's probably on the order of a year or two. And for my money, I don't want to go beyond this summer without deploying serious, massive scale SRM, something which would normally take humanity probably a decade to do, like the Apollo program. We need to do it not in 12 years, but in 12 months or less. We need to fast track this like nothing else. Feed everyone and cool the planet. More questions, more comments. I'm going to go on mute. Anyone jump in with anything to add?
Thank you, Jamin.
Well, I would like to just add that the projections are 10 degrees within 10 years, as soon as we start losing the first ice in the Arctic. And I might reiterate that before we ever get to 10 degrees, when we get to 4, that's extinction level for majority of species on the planet anyway. So we have much less time than to be waiting for 10 degrees to even come anywhere near us. The projections and the studies that have been done in the Arctic at the moment, unfortunately, are looking like we're ever increasingly approaching on maybe this year, September at least, being an ice-free Arctic. And the albedo effect alone from the missing ice on the oceans is it's equivalent to a number of nuclear bombs going off, and the energy of a number of nuclear bombs going into the ocean every day. So you have to think of it in that kind of capacity, because those are the figures you're thinking about when the energy has been put in there. And that energy has been stored up for the last 40 odd years of CO2 emissions going into it, increased CO2 emissions, I should say, on top of everything else. So with the Arctic warming now twice as fast as the rest of the planet, we are racing against time, basically. I would also add that the idea of the global masking effect, where the particulates from the burning of fossil fuels, that the fact that if we don't continue burning them, that they fall out within 6 to 12 weeks, 6 days to 12 weeks, or 12 days even. Point is that that's proof alone that geoengineering, by spraying other chemicals up into the atmosphere, is only a very temporary thing. They would have to be constantly replenished in the atmosphere all the time, because they will fall out of the atmosphere as well in up to 6 days to 12 weeks, whichever. But the fact is, they'll be falling down on the population who'll be dealing with breathing that in and all the other complications that will come with that. So it must be a compassionate way that we deal with the problem. And the most compassionate way is to just reflect the energy back. Literally, it's the most passive way of doing it as well. But it's also the most, according to Professor Yeto, the most economical and efficient as well. But we can also all add and help with the painting of rooftops, and as James said, there's various numbers of ways we can help, but they should be all through compassionate and positive ways, without using any form of chemical engineering.
The good thing about painting rooftops is that, especially in tropical areas, is that then you automatically cool your home as well. And then you reduce the amount of cooling you need to do inside, whether you're using electricity for it or AC or whatever. Every one of those devices is generating heat because it's basically an entropy machine. So We are cooling the inside, then we're sending the heat outside. um, with all the extra energy we are burning. So this is why I think it makes the most sense. Let's get everyone involved in painting their roofs white first. With material that would reflect not just the visible light, but also in the infrared region. So as much of the sun's energy back as possible, right? And so you're then literally cooling yourself too in the process.
I'm going to take my leave, everyone, but that was beautiful. I'm really glad to be part of that, and much love, everyone.
Awesome. Great to see you, Charlie. Have a great night. So thanks.
Likewise.
So much. That was perfect.
Thanks, Charlie. Enjoy.
Catch up soon.
All right.
Okay.
And Ray, you had your hand up.
Jamin, are there laws currently in place that protect us from the worst ideas of geoengineering? And if so, are there ways that we can tease out the rational solutions and distance ourselves from them? Because it's not that much in the collective consciousness, but what is in the collective consciousness is the Snowpiercer movie where geoengineering goes wrong and everybody's submerged into a frozen planet.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for that, which is we need to pass a law, or we need to get the UN to say that all geoengineering work cannot be patented. There'll be no money made on any of that work, right? So then, you throw away all the private interests, okay? So then the real solutions will bubble to the surface, because the others are typically because somebody has some vested interest and is pushing it. They're trying to make money off of it. And if you say all geoengineering has to be open source, that's it. Then only the real people who are doing it for the good of humanity, the good of the world, will continue to work.
I was going to mention that earlier, and I was thinking that the academic squabbles over different methodologies and inability to communicate with each other, are there patents lurking somewhere in the background? It was something that came up earlier when we were talking about sustainable development goals, and that chart, which I've discovered is from Development Canada, crowing about the opportunities, the philanthropic opportunities, plus these great investment opportunities to fight sustainable development goals. Get your patents in now. There's patents that can save the world. You don't want to miss these opportunities. And there's, the Vandana Shiva criticizes Bill Gates for a lot of his ventures into saving the world with patents. Like he's going to, create a nutritious form of rice, the golden rice fiasco with genetic engineering. So these are all, ideas that, however you evaluate them from good to bad, they always swing towards bad as soon as there's something like patents involved, because it gets pushed no matter whether it works or not, And there's so many good ideas that could have been trampled along the way. But my question was, is there existing now any laws, or like there must be some way that anybody who's got the money and the resources and the wherewithal is going to say, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to go fly my plane up in the air and start pumping sulfur into the atmosphere. It's a field that I'm not that familiar with, so I'm wondering just the terrain, the starting positions of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, as far as I know, there are no laws right now prohibiting, making money off of geoengineering. There are no laws like that. I think everyone is looking at it as an economic opportunity. And this is why I say, so far, entire climate change debate, the entire discussion about biodiversity laws, ecosystems collapse, all of the environmental issues have been centered around how can we make money off of it. And so this is where everyone comes in. This is the current system that we have. How can I make money off of it? So to me, it's a little bit like, the earth is having this fever and this cancer and this diabetes, and people are saying, hey, I can do bypass surgery on the earth and I can get $100 trillion out of it. I can do, so all these procedures that I can do to the earth, and how much money can I make out of it, and how it's going to completely change who are the winners, who are the losers in the economic paradigm, right? That's the mindset that we are in. And with that mindset, we are not going to survive. The earth is not going to survive. The earth is going to kill us off and start over. That's where we are headed, So the only way to deal with this is to heal the earth. And to heal the earth, you have to heal ourselves too. And to stop this madness of making money off of other people's suffering, and making money off of the suffering of animals, So we need to get out of that mode, that game, the game of monopoly that we are playing. It's a game of monopoly that's been rigged, and a few people have cornered all the properties, and the rest of us are all paying rent as we go around. And I'm saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this game, right? So, in fact, that Kimberly Jones video, she talks about Monopoly game, and she's saying, we played Monopoly with you for 400 years, and every time you took our winnings and took it from us. So now, you want us to start from scratch and play Monopoly again. How can we survive? How can we thrive? So why are we playing the game in the first place? Don't we know a better game to play? So I think that's the kind of questions that we need to be asking now, and changing the game altogether.
Well,
because, yeah, you fooled us for so many years. Okay, fine. But now, forget it. We don't want to be fooled anymore. And we need to change the game.
the obvious new game is an economy much more centered around food and local and demonetization. Let's demonetize the economy. It's all a gift and this and that. That becomes the heart of it. Now, we need clothing. Okay, fine. Whether we, use an existing textile mill because that's efficient, but adapt it for hemp instead of cotton, whatever. Okay, these are all elements of the new economy. But with the food thing, it's going to change our hearts, minds, and spirits. It's going to be a spiritual transformation for the two huge reasons of compassion by no more killing or exploitation of animals, and feeding all humans, not just those rich enough to go to that expensive vegan restaurant, right? So food, and then SRM is really like a giant footnote. The headline is, we're feeding everyone and we're transforming the world and ourselves by stopping killing and promoting healing and all that. There's just this giant inconvenient footnote that says, you know what? Oh, the house is actually on fire. I'm really sorry, but we got to, okay, let's get through this. Deploy the damn SRM. The sooner you do it, the less of the house you lose, right? So again, it's just a big, fat, inconvenient footnote. It's not what we're here. What we're here to do is to grow food and feed everyone and love everyone and to heal and pet the koala bears. That's why we're here, right? We're not here to do weird SRM projects, but that we just got to do it, right?
Well,
So
to
the
get
best
people
way,
in the game,
go ahead, James. Yeah.
to get people in the game, they have to understand what's at stake, and they have to understand what the stakes are, and so they have to. You have to, as Silas said, you have to show them. And I put a link up there. It's a weather show. I watch it there every month. They put a post every month, and basically they cover the whole month's weather from around the world, from on the spot reports by people who send in little video clips from their own mobile phones. So it's not from the mainstream media, because we don't get told any of this on the mainstream media. But I put in a link there just for April, just April just gone, but they cover every month. But just watch what's happening in April, and if you wanted to look back over the other months, and it's literally every day all over the world, you could see how desperate the world is, how desperate the planet is crying out, and how, you know, how much anguish it's in, and we're going to suffer because we caused it. So, you know, I think it'd be worth everyone's while to just copy that link and have a look at it on YouTube for after this or whatever, just to, you know, we need to remind ourselves of the severity of the situation.
At the same time, there has to be some sort of environmental assessment of any solution that we come up with. And that's a very complicated thing, because there's, I mean, nature is a very complicated place to be, and fitting our humanity into it. We do want to survive as part of this equation. But one of the things that just came up for me, I was just doing some research on the black locust trees in my yard to find out whether the blossoms, which are blooming right now, whether they're edible. And I know they are, so I'm finding little recipes. And one of the things I've discovered by happenstance is that they're an invasive species. They're from the Ozarks, and they are invasive in Ontario. So a little bit more research, it turns out there's these like 4 species of flowers which are crowded out and are endangered, not because of these trees. There's not an awful lot of them. There's a bunch that were planted in Toronto and a few in Northern Ontario and some near Ottawa. They're identified as an invasive species, but these these small kinds of flowers that it encroaches their territories and competes with. How do you make decisions like that? These are complicated things that, and this is a relatively simple comparison of a few different species, but once you get into global kind of solutions, then you have to try to figure out what are the side effects and what's a reasonable amount of casualties. This is kind of like war. You have to try to find out where to apply the pressure. And it's good that we've got universities thinking about these things, and I'm just hoping that they are.
Yeah, even universities, unfortunately, once they got into the patent game, they have been sort of chasing after that as opposed to, you know, true research, unbiased research, which is what they were originally intended for, right? Universities are supposed to be doing that. Or you think about the original Bell Labs, you know, where research was being done because people love to work on new things, not because they were going to make money off of it, right? I think that motivation, that different motivation, just spoils even university research and makes it tainted. Yeah, so I'm looking for more open source community research organizations, you know, like Sadhana Forest, for instance. You know, they are working on regenerating forests, but using by planting the native trees and shrubs in that area. Okay? So exclusively native trees and shrubs, because that's what the native animals need to thrive. These invasive species don't help the native animals as much, right? So, and we tend to be very adaptive as a species, so we can live with almost anything, but, you know, other animals can't. They depend on some of those native trees as food sources. So it's important that we bring those back. And even food, you know, I mean, it should be taken out of the realm of money altogether. There should be no money being made in growing food. farmers have to be basically guaranteed a good living, right? Because they're growing food for us. That's their contribution to the rest of us. So the community needs to take care of them for doing that, you know. And like, I mean, I know the history of how food became a priced commodity in India, and I mean, until the 18th century, Indians never paid for food. It was not part of our culture at all. It was, and even when I was growing up, it was, the culture was that you go to anyone's place, you get to eat with them. They served you first before they served themselves. Okay, this was how it was. This was how the culture was. So food was just a given. You had to feed your guest. Your guest was, you know, was treated higher than God, right? That's the idea, that you need to take care of the guest first. And so people never really had to scrounge for food. Famine was a very rare thing in India. Maybe once every 100 years, they used to have famines. But when the colonial powers realized that Indians cannot be subdued as long as they could eat, that's when they decided how to, you know, get Indians to start growing the same monoculture over and over. So by taxing them in that particular grain, so they taxed us in rice or taxed us in wheat, depending on the region of the country. And so that forced people to grow the same thing to pay the taxman. And the taxman essentially was taking the food and dumping it eventually. Because they really were, it was not, the idea was not that they were going to do anything with the food. It was to make sure that we were being taxed in the same grain. And therefore, we were dependent on commerce to feed ourselves. So we had to exchange. You know, we had to go sell our food and then use that to buy vegetables and buy fruits that you're not growing anymore because you're growing the same monoculture to pay the taxman. So, and then we were starting to have famines every 10 years, you know. So it's a return back to our old culture. It's nothing new. It's really returning back to the old culture in which food was a given. Everyone grew food and gave it away. It was to be shared with everyone. And then the rest, we figure out how to live, right? So when you look at our bare necessities, there isn't much beyond food and shelter and clothing. That's our basic necessities. The rest you can make sure that they last for 20 years, right? So you build a phone that lasts for 20 years. We know how to do that. You know, we can engineer things to last a long time. We don't have to change this every 6 months. Who said it needs to be changed every 6 months? We are doing that just to feed Apple's profits. It's not because of any necessity. So it's about changing our mindset on these things, you know. And when you start pricing this based on its actual impact on the planet, you will be building it so that it lasts for 20 years, right? Because you realize the entropy cost of building something like this is huge. And we are not paying for it right now. You know, we're literally not paying for it. We are just foisting the cost on other people and on the animals. We're saying, you know, let them have the pollution. I will just get my product, right? So once we start pricing things to the actual cost, we will be designing things correctly. And so it's an entirely different engineering project, you know, creating this new model. It's a different engineering project altogether. where we will be looking at, rather than silicon, can we do all this in carbon so that it can just go back to the earth after we are done, right? So once you start pricing these things based on the actual entropy costs, we will be figuring out the right materials as well. So there's a tremendous amount of research work to be done, in the new model. There's a tremendous amount of innovation that needs to happen. But we need to first get the model right. So currently, what is our police doing? They're protecting the property of the people who have the property. That's all they're doing. And if one guy owns a lot, then his property is being protected by all of us. We are paying the police to protect his property. Right? So we need to change the game altogether, right? Otherwise, we are stuck in the old game. Anyway, that's all in a little white paper that I wrote. It's called the position paper these days because I don't want it to be white. I don't want to associate white with good and black with bad. So let me put the link up for that.
And if you published a black paper, it would just use up too much. As if anybody prints anything out anymore.
I know.
So here's the thought. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of work to come up with this new model and the laws and the policy and the framework and the culture and everything else, related to it. What if, for chapter 1 of the new story, we just focused on 2 things: food and cool, right? And said, look, we're doing these things first, and in parallel, as we do these things, we're going to dream into chapter 2, the new model, right? The new mode of production, the new, you could just say the rest of the story of how we take care of ourselves. The first 2 things are, feed everyone and put out the fires. Those are just urgent things, which ideally, once we get these solved, we'll never have to solve them again. Right? They just be, well, of course everyone eats. And of course we regulate the temperature. We're the thermostat species, right? And then we get to the real interesting work. All right. Now that we've put out the fire and fed everyone. Okay. All right. Who are we anyway? And why are we here? Right? And that's really the fun part, right? But it's kind of hard to have fun when you're dying of starvation. And it's kind of hard to have fun when your hair is on fire, right? So let's put out the fires, feed everyone, and then get on with the really fun stuff. And the cool thing is we'll be in a context of cooperation and unity and love and compassion and healing at that point, just because of chapter 1. See, so chapter 1 is going to get us to a whole new place in life and in reality, right? Where I think chapter 2 will become a lot clearer from the vantage point of chapter 1. See, right now we're just in the introduction. Right? So let's not worry so much about chapter 2 right now. Let's really focus on chapter 1. And I think chapter 2 will get a lot clearer as we go.
Yeah, I think, Jamin, I would like to invite you to the meetings we are having with Nivi on the docu-series or a documentary series that we're doing on the new story and the new game. So it's basically telling it from the perspective of Kimaya, who's 40 years old. So, which will be in the year 2050. And she's in a thriving planet, right? The idea is that she's in a thriving planet and she's looking back and saying, this is what these people did that helped us get over this and, change from a caterpillar to a butterfly and all that, So the story has to be told from that perspective, so that people feel like, yeah, now we are part of a larger picture, larger story, right? So it's like you tell the story and then you drag people along with you in that story. Otherwise, they don't know where you're going with this, right? You're saying, yeah, you have to do this. Well, what does it mean? So you need to tell that kind of story. Because right now, there are a lot of stories being told that are very dystopian. They're saying, yeah, we're going to hell in a handbasket. You know, I mean, this is like saying, why would life create a species that's going to drive life to extinction? Why did life do that, right? Why would life do that? Life never does that. They just never done that in the past. So you need to tell a story in which life created us for a purpose, and she is fulfilling that purpose, and she is going to thrive at the end, right? So basically, it has to be a story of thriving. So it's like looking back from year 2050, and then we'll take the clips that we have today and put it in black and white to make it look like it's an old clip, right, from 2010 or 2020, where Kimaya is 10 years old and she's talking in black and white, right? So that's how we are imagining telling this new story. And so that I think, you know, we need to sort of, so that storytelling has to go along with the projects. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm convinced, Silas. I'm convinced, totally convinced. And I guess part of what so maybe to take a different take on the whole of it is indeed tell the story as a whole, right? But in terms of the details, put a lot more focus on chapter 1. Chapter 2, just, you know, have the outline 3, 4, 5 through 12, the whole story, right? But, you know, just like we were talking about driving to New York, we don't even need to know the address yet, much less the last routes. We just need to head east at this point. Right.
Yeah, we are imagining the docuseries as a 7-season series. So maybe it's 6 episodes of 12 minutes each per year, right? So we are telling the story of 2020 now, and then 2021 next year, 2022 next year, but always from the vantage point of a Kimaya who's looking back from the year 2050. Right? So then you're sort of showing the progress, and so we're sort of counting down to year 2026, by which time we want the whole world to be vegan. Right? We have that goal, right, to make it happen. And so then we'll be discussing things, you know, we'll be interviewing people, and people are going to be saying things like, yeah, you know, what's the big deal? We're going to eat this instead of that. It's not a big sacrifice for us as human beings, but it means the world to the animals, right? Means the world to life in general. So yeah, of course we can do that. So that's the kind of storytelling we need to tell, right? As if it's happened.
Yeah, totally. I love
looking
it.
back and saying, oh, how did it happen?
I love it. It's perfect. You start at the end point.
Yeah.
Then you backfill. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I think Nivi is a great person to start this thing with. And I think Ray, we're going to invite you also to join to do some screenwriting for us on these episodes. So we can imagine. I think we also have an idea of what the first 2 or 3 episodes have to be, because you have to look at different aspects of the transformation that needs to happen. And then we have to talk to different people. Maybe it's interviewing Kate Raworth as part of the docuseries, you know, and interviewing Etau as part of the docuseries. That's the idea, you know, creating this docuseries about these figures that were central to Kimaya's story from 2050. So she's highlighting who were the central figures that so she remembers who did their work, you know, to make it happen.
Is it somehow related to or inspired by Endgame 2050?
Yes, it's inspired by Endgame 2050, but it was basically a New Game 2050 is the name of the project. New Game 2050, but the original producer does not want to be involved. So she said, you know, you guys can do this. I mean, she wants to talk about animals, specific animals. You know, she has a new idea for her Endgame 2050 sequel. So we are doing this separately as a docuseries, and we're going to involve other, like maybe Kip and Keegan. Maybe it could be done under the AUM films, and then we can do the fundraising.
That Endgame at all? Does it reference Endgame 2050 at all?
No. It references basically it's basically a Kimaya looking back from 2050 idea, right? And Nivi will play the role of Kimaya, or someone like Nivi, because Nivi looks like Kimaya too. And she is roughly the same age that Kimaya would be in the year 2050. So it's a storytelling in a way that gets people excited about, yeah, I want to make this happen too. I want to join this movement to make it happen. As opposed to pointing out all the bugs and all the problems we have today and why it's going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah, that's the mess we have to clean up. So we'll talk about how we are cleaning up the mess too in the process. But we're talking about how we were in the caterpillar phase and we are shifting to the butterfly phase, and this is the COVID-19 put us in the chrysalis, and this is the chrysalis that we are in. And so it completely changed our economy. So we had to think afresh. And so then we decided to feed everybody first, So it's telling the story of a thriving world. Okay, from the vantage point of a thriving world, in which we were just like the elephant. The elephant is doing something that seems destructive, and then you look closer, you see that it's actually doing something constructive, right? Just like that, we think we are doing something destructive, but when we look closer, we're doing something constructive. And we are in the process. This is why we put Trump up there, because he's pointing out all the bugs in our society, right? I mean, he's highlighting it. He's the true shadow that we needed. So he's saying, yeah, I am a racist, And people can say, I don't want to be like you anymore. So anyway, thank you all.
Awesome, Silas. Hey, count me in. Just send me the invites. And when do you all meet for those meetings?
We're meeting every Thursday. I think it's 1 to 3.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, count me in. Just send me the invite. I'm there. I would love to. Be delighted. This is what we have to do. It's the new story. You're always a couple steps ahead of me, Silas. I'm going to have to figure out what you eat for breakfast in the morning or something.
No. I am lucky because I live with Kimaya most of the time. Okay, so it's like the new story, the new game is right there.
That's it. Yeah. Anyway, count me 200% in, and we just got to keep pushing, everybody. Let's keep figuring this out from all the appropriate angles. We got food, we've got story, and we've got SRM.
Right.
Those are the big three, right? Collective intelligence will just emerge. It'll pop out of it just naturally. But those are the ones we got to focus on. So awesome.
All right. So speaking of food, I have to go get some food. So thank you very much.
Go for it. Thank you, Silas. Great hanging with you today. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Pleasure.
Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. All right. I'm going to stop the current recording.